life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.
Welcome to episode number 98 of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a podcast showcasing the wide range of perspectives and ideas throughout antinatalism as it exists today, through interviews with antinatalist and non-antinatalist thinkers and creators of all kinds, now running 5 years strong. I'm your host, Amanda Sukenick, and today I'm speaking with Ph.D.s in History of Science and Health at the COC-Fiocruz Laboratory of History, Climate Anxieties and Health, LHACS, and the co-author team behind the new academic paper,
A Marcha dos Espectros Não Nascidos, Antinatalismo, Assombrologia e Futuros Históricos.
or in English, The March of the Unborn Specters, Anti-natalism, Hauntology, and Historical Futures, Jorge Tibilletti de Lara and Gabriel Lopes. Jorge and Gabriel, welcome to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you both on the show with me today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hello, Amanda.
So, Jorge and Gabriel, it was an absolute delight to read your recent Portuguese language article on antinatalism, not least, of course, because you happen to write a bit about me and my efforts over the years. Thank you so much for doing that. But not only me, but also Lawrence's Antinatalism Handbook, Metaphysical Exiles recent work, all of these sort of like non-academic efforts in antinatalism that don't get a lot of attention, and you make the sort of point that these worlds of academic and non-academic antinatalism are starting to sort of blur, especially over the last 4 years, or the last 2 years especially. And I think that this is a really important point. I think there's a tremendous research gap in the current existing literature on antinatalism that addresses that there are these two different worlds of antinatalism. They've been very separate over the last nearly 20 years, but they're sort of starting to collide. And it's a fascinating thing. It's a fascinating subject for a paper, although there's much more to the paper than that. So we have so much to talk about today. I'm just absolutely thrilled to get you guys on the show. But before we begin anything properly about the paper itself, I want to know about the two of you. So if we could maybe take turns, if you gentlemen wouldn't mind, starting with perhaps you, Jorge. Who is Jorge Tibilletti de Lara? I hope I'm pronouncing your full name correctly. And Gabriel Lopes.
My name is Jorge Tibilletti de Lara, and I am a Brazilian historian. I need to warn you as soon as possible that my English is not the best, but please bear with me. My work as a historian involves the field of the history of science and health and historical analysis in general. I have been studying, for example, the history of tropical diseases, the construction of knowledge about life, like biology, ecology, medicine, and I also work on environmental and global issues involving science and health. I am currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation. That is the leading public health research institution in Latin America. So I think it's it.
Hello, Amanda. It's an honor to be here. I guess provisionally, Gabriel Lopes is a Brazilian historian of science and health who has recently become interested in pessimism, antinatalism, and climate anxieties. My work as historian covers subjects such as history of public health, the history of biological control, the history of mosquito-borne diseases, and environmental history.
Busy guys. That's amazing. Thank you so much for those details. Again, if you wouldn't mind taking turns, could each of you explain why you are or not antinatalists?
Yes, I am an antinatalist. not only because I believe that bringing new lives into the world is worse than not doing so, but because I consider life as a phenomenon to be something negative.
Yeah, I had doubts about this, about considering myself an antinatalist, but during the process of researching and writing this article, this process has given me the conviction that I am an antinatalist. I believe that non-existence is better than existence, and that reproduction is the cause of a harm that can be and must be avoided.
Amazing. Well, it's especially amazing too that the process of writing this paper, Gabriel, kind of acted as a source of convincing you of the position. So amazing. Well, thank you, guys. Thank you both so much for that. How do each of you feel that antinatalism should be defined?
Well, for me, being an antinatalist is deliberately deciding not to procreate and generally being against procreation for ethical and philosophical reasons in general.
Yeah, for me, ideally, antinatalism should be defined in such a way as to encompass as many varieties as possible. I believe that positions on type of antinatalism are developing, unsettling in conceptual terms recently. And from my current point of view, I believe that even encouraging the creation of sentient artificial intelligence should be avoided. I must say that you and Mati Hari have done an excellent job organizing these concepts in the flowchart on page 30 of the book Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption. It's a very useful flowchart. And this book is helping me a lot to think about things that I didn't have time to think about while I was writing the paper that we are going to talk today.
Well, thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant answers from both of you. Thank you. I can't take too terribly much credit for that flowchart, that graphic. I mean, I certainly contributed to it, but Mati has a particular talent for creating these diagrams, and yeah, I agree. It lays it out really rather beautifully. So I'm happy to hear. I'm sure he will as well hear that it was helpful to both of you in your research. You've both spoken a little bit about this already in detailing your academic histories, but aside from antinatalism, what other areas of academic interest do both of you hold? And Gabriel, it's interesting that you mentioned that you have a background studying some things about mosquitoes. I mean, and I'm completely forgetting the name of the experiment now, but there was that brilliant experiment where they took mosquitoes and made them sort of infertile, to combat malaria. I mean, it was sort of an interesting form of animal-focused antinatalism in a sense. But anyway, please go on.
I'm interested in discussions about the history of science in general, especially biology, environmental issues, and diseases. We are currently interested in the ideas of eco-anxiety or climate anxieties, and how this relates to pessimism and the theory of history, as well as reproductive pessimisms in general.
Yeah, basically, I'm studying the history of biomedical sciences and the history of epidemics and pandemics. And yes, I agree with Jorge that themes in theory of history that are emerging now are not taking into account important pessimistic aspects that we think antinatalism brings in a very concrete way. And you mentioned about the mosquito, the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and the Wolbachia bacteria. Yeah, it's an experiment that's going on in Brazil right now, and I wrote about this.
May I ask, I mean, is this the first time that you two have collaborated? You seem to make an excellent team together, so I wondered if you've done other things together.
Yes, we've been working together for a few years now. We've already written about the history of dengue fever and the Aedes aegypti mosquito in Brazil, the history of a rabbit plague in Australia, and the Brazilian proposal for a solution using viruses. from the habit myxoma virus, as well as an essay on animal pathogens and vectors from a global perspective. And our partnership recently led to the creation of LHACS, the Laboratory of History, Climate, Anxieties and Health, whose inaugural text was our article, The March of the Unborn Specters.
Yes, thanks. I think we are a good team. We already wrote 2 articles together and 1 book chapter on those topics, tropical diseases and history of animals and health. And this article, Jorge said, was about this rabbit plague in Australia, where British colonizers brought rabbits to Australia to hunt them, like sport hunting, and they proliferate, and they became during the 50s the gray blanket around Australia, and the Brazilian researcher had this idea to bring this virus to Australia, South American virus to Australia, to kill the rabbits, and was partly successful.
All right, brilliant. Well, I will definitely link to all of like prior works that you guys have done below, but there's nothing quite like finding that perfect collaborative partner. So congratulations to both of you. Really, it sounds like you guys have done some amazing work together. And this current paper on antinatalism is no exception. Now, is this the first work that either of you have done on antinatalism? It's entirely possible I could have missed something along the way. So have either of you written about the subject prior to this?
Yes, it's our first work on the subject. We also believe it's the first Brazilian article on the subject.
It may very well have been. I know of one other article. I couldn't possibly remember the name of it right now. The only reason I know about it is I think it's from about 2019. And it's in Portuguese, so honestly, it might not be from Brazil. But the only reason I know of it is that it comes from ethylism, it mentions ethylism. But maybe, I don't know. I'd have to do some further research into that. But that's another piece of exciting little factoid about this work. So yeah, I'll have to verify that for sure. All right, well let's. Oh, sorry, Gabriel, go ahead.
I believe so, especially I think regarding theory of history, hauntology, and antinatalism. I think it's the first. Actually, wrote this article thinking about historians and people who is currently writing about theory of history. And also, I think we are going to do more. The Laboratory of History, Climate, Anxieties and Health is expanding. And possibly our next article will be a development of some ideas about anxiety, pessimism, and antinatalism with Fernando Olszewski, the metaphysical exile. Actually, he's my neighbor here. I met him last weekend. We had some beers and we talked about this. I guess Fernando was interviewed by Lawrence Anton last week.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Wow, that's a small world. That's incredible. So so great. I'm so glad a third shall join your wonderful collaborative team. So that's fantastic. He does amazing work. So I think that's you've definitely found another very worthy collaborative partner. With that having been said, let's properly move on to the article. So the article in English is titled "The March of the Unborn Specters: Antinatalism, Hauntology, and Historical Futures." I'd like to begin by reading out the abstract. Would either of you like to read the abstract, or would you like me to?
Go ahead, Amanda, please. Thanks.
All right, sure, absolutely. This article aims to explore the historical meaning of the end of times in a pessimistic conjecture, which is expressed by the increase in contemporary antinatalist anxieties in philosophical proposals, the formation of online groups, and activism. We use the concepts of historical futures and hauntology to understand the historical meanings that is that the different antinatalist approaches can mobilize from the idea of a world without us. To do this, we will explore some of the ways in which the antinatalist approaches relates to other reproductive pessimisms and how activism and online communities have contributed to the discussion, pointing out the confluences and divergences. We argue that this contemporary antinatalist thinking galvanizes an unprecedented discussion about a negative sense of history. Absolutely brilliant. Real quick, I didn't write a question about this, but when you talk about other antinatalisms, I mean, are you in part or in future works, do you sort of plan on branching out to, things like birth strike, that like 4B movement? I always forget if it's 4B or B4, but there's all these other sort of like maybe not quite antinatalist, but sort of tertiary identities being created around having kids. And I mean, that didn't come into play specifically in this work, but those groups, I would say, have a more focused, are more focused in their reaction to climate change than perhaps a lot of contemporary antinatalism is. So I was just curious as to your interest in those types of groups.
Yeah, I think the field is very rich, and we try to map in Brazil. That's why we use the term reproductive anxieties, reproductive pessimism, and eco-anxieties, because in a way, the two things are together. But reproductive anxieties is a broader term. It can include aphilism, antinatalism, and those things, and also some movements online that people that don't know that those antinatalist movements exist, they are complaining and they are trying to, especially in Brazil, we see here we have a strong Christian culture, and we are a country, developing country, so we have many issues of inequalities, and we find out that there are many online communities, including antinatalist communities, that are speaking about this idea, and we define this as reproductive pessimism in general. I think can encompass those things as well, those movements as well.
Again, this is not a question I wrote, but it just comes to mind now. I hope you don't mind me putting it in. But I mean, I've noticed that all over South America, if I search for, current news on antinatalism, there's like two different meanings of the word going on, right? Like often it's so sometimes you have news stories that like specifically use the word to denote conversations about like, David Benatar and what things that we would recognize as contemporary antinatalism. But then there's also, especially in religious publications, they sort of use the word specifically to talk about things like abortion or family planning or some of these other things. I mean, have you, I'm sure you guys have noticed that, but I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that, or how the term is sort of being navigated by popular media or things like that?
We mentioned something like this in the article about Vera Iaconelli, a Brazilian researcher. We mentioned this book, Manifesto Antinatalista. She's talking about the
Manifesto
Anti-maternalism. Anti-maternalist manifesto. And she's talking about the attribution to mothers, the responsibility to have kids, this attribution to mothers, and this burden, especially in Brazil. This discussion we see that is happening, and mothers are complaining about this burden, social burden, and also the moralization of being a mother. Feminist groups are discussing about this idea. And we think that this is very important in Brazil, and in newspapers, Vera Iaconelli gave some interviews published in her book, and this started new discussions about the role of the mothers and pessimist reproduction, these ideas about reproduction and the burden of being a mother.
Brilliant. I mean, I definitely noticed reference to that book, but I had kind of somewhat looked over it. So I really appreciate you showing the cover of the book and bringing it to, more in focused attention. Just out of curiosity, do works like that bring up things like Julio Cabrera, or does it have sort of a conversation between their concerns and like contemporary antinatalism, or are those things still pretty very separate?
Not yet,
Not
not yet.
yet.
But I think in the future will be like, because we quote Variaconelli and we quote Cabrera in our article, and we want to make this conversation happen. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think it's very important.
I think there's all these different worlds that are just waiting to collide, which is one of the reasons why your article is so important, because it starts to spark that colliding of worlds, and it points out all of the worlds that are already sort of colliding, and that's very important. So may I ask, how did this paper come about? I mean, guys have spoken a little bit about the motivations behind it, but I'd love to know sort of a bit of the history of this paper.
Yeah. Sure. I met Jorge in 2018. I was teaching classes on history of public health, and he was a student at Fiocruz, a master's degree student. And then we started to talk, and we have similar tastes in music. And we went to a black metal concert, and we started to think and talk about pessimism and those things, and movies, literature. Actually, Jorge has a band, heavy metal band, and he's a director of short movies. Very interesting. We can talk more about this later. But then I started to read authors like Cioran, Schopenhauer, and Eugene Tecker. I started to read Eugene Tecker, Pessimist Philosophers, in 2015 during my Ph.D. And then we found the debates around antinatalism around July 2023. And we started to read like crazy and watch podcasts and movies and those things. And then we had this, by the end of 2023, we had this call for articles for the dossier Apocalyptic and Anti-Apocalyptic Perspectives for Inhabiting the Present, Reexisting, Thinking, Experiencing, and Living the End of the World Together. From Resgate, the journal we published, it's an interdisciplinary humanities journal from the University of Campinas in the state of São Paulo. And we had a short time to write this article. It was 2 months. We said, no, we had to do this, and I had many obligations, Georgie as well, and this is the opportunity to publish this article, because I don't think we can publish anywhere else in Brazil, because it's complicated. And then we start to write in the beginning of 2024, this year, and then was published by the end of the year. We had some issues because they couldn't find reviewers for the article. Many reviewers denied to review the article. And then we got this very bad peer review, but in the end, we could manage to convince the editors to publish it. So we worked hard to publish this article. We had like some issues, very strong opinions about this article. The peer reviewers were like unmerciful, but we got this published.
May I ask why they were so opposed?
They said that it was obvious. They said that, okay, we are living in times of climate anxieties and the Anthropocene and climate change. Of course, the pessimism about breeding, about reproducing is growing. And they found it obvious. I don't think they liked the article, but was very, very aggressive, but at the same time poor, but we had to answer.
Without getting into specifics, I know something about how difficult it is to create antinatalist focused academic works, and there's pushback the world over, and it's kind of uncharted territory. So really, like, major kudos to you both for just not relenting at any point and keeping it going, because again, it's a really important article. So and Georgie, just wanted to say real quick, I did notice your name on the metal archives, and so yeah, I'd love to know more about your band and the movies that you made. We'll have to talk about that at some point soon. Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I play I have played in heavy metal bands since 2011, and I I have many projects of black metal and traditional heavy metal bands, and uh, the last project of black metal that I have was Coveiro, that is grave digger in English.
Gravedigger.
Uh, that is the pessimistic black metal project. So yeah, I play bass and vocals, and I am a metalhead too.
I'm a huge metalhead. I've been a fan of black metal since my early teenage years. So we'll have to link to some of that below if you're game to do that for sure. So amazing. I definitely
Yes.
want to hear your music. Just in case anyone in our audience is unfamiliar with the term hauntology, could you guys explain what that term means a little bit?
Sure.
Yes. In our proposal, we are guided by Martin Hagland's approach. That is, what is important about the figure of the spectre then is that it cannot be fully present. It has no being in itself, but marks a relation to what is no longer or not yet present. Uh, and also by Mark Fisher's definition, that is provisionally, then we can distinguish two directions in haunting. The first refers to what in reality no longer exists, but is still effective as virtuality, the compulsive and traumatic repetition, a structure that repeats itself, a fatal pattern. And second refers to what in reality hasn't happened yet, but which is already effective in the virtual, an attractor and anticipation that shapes current behavior.
Yeah, we use this actually in history, theory of history. The spectre is part of the what is called spectral figures of time. So we use this allegory to usually in history they say a lot. Authors use this allegory of the spectre to mention a past that's still present, like in a traumatic way. So it's usually from the past to the present. But when we use the specter of unborn, we say that it's something in the future that affects potentially the suffering in the future that affects the present in antinatalism thinking and anxieties. So it's something that hasn't happened yet, but it's already effective in the virtual. It's an anticipation.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it spoke to me specifically because I often use the word specter to kind of refer to certain, like especially the idea of the reemergence of conscious, like as an extinctionist, we talk about how like okay, we could maybe achieve extinction, but then there's sort of this specter of evolution, the specter of life reoccurring. And so it made me very so I did a lot more looking into hauntology after reading your paper, and I think there is a further connection there that I'm really interested in grasping. It's interesting. In your guys' opinion, can hauntology refer to evolution? Is that a strange way of understanding the term, like the reemergence of life, the reemergence of consciousness, sentience, like all of these possibilities for how life can come about, or is that a bit? I mean, that's certainly trauma. So, but yeah, I'm curious about.
Yeah, I think the way you put it's very interesting, especially for extinctionist claims, because I believe for an extinctionist, evolution can halt as life emerges from the non-life and sentience falls. So it's a problem for extinctionists. We don't know what's going to happen after because life emerges from non-life, and it's completely unpredictable, maybe.
For sure. I'll just briefly say this. I wrote a long, rambly question about this, but I'll just briefly say it's really interesting that you're bringing hauntology and reference to Mark Fisher into this discussion because Mark Fisher, as I'm sure you guys know, he did almost coin the term antinatalism. Like there's actual references to anti-natalism in some of his works that were actually removed from his archive, like in his compiled works. Like his archivist actually removed those references because they like didn't want him associated with that. So it's interesting. So I don't know, it just sort of seemed like a reclaiming of Mark Fisher as some sort of antinatalist to refer to him in this work. The idea of antinatalism as not only philosophy but a social movement has been extremely controversial, especially amongst antinatalism, antinatalists. It's sort of represented a paradigm shift away from David Benatar, just sort of like more academic focuses. And I think works that have made reference to sort of what's going on in the social movement from academia have been sort of somewhat like, obviously embraced by people like me, but somewhat of a cause for alarm to some, which is always really interesting. But as I've said several times, precious few academic works have really made such an inquiry investigation into how antinatalism has developed in these ways over really the last nearly 20 years since the publication of David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been. What caused you guys to want to make the investigation and to begin to fill this very massive, research gap that exists in the literature?
Our investigation quickly identified that philosophy and antinatalism in academia seemed really close to the online exchange environment, or the other way around. Based on the idea of historical futures by Zoltan Bodzar-Simon and Marek Tan, who think of anticipatory practice as something that does not come exclusively from the academic intellectual environment, we made this connection. Incidentally, in historiography, there has been a lot of talk in recent years about public history and the historical narratives produced by groups outside the university environment. We therefore thought that investigation those relationships would be useful, even from a historiographical point of view. In other words, antinatalism as an anticipatory practice exists not only as a research agenda, but as an agenda that mobilizes groups and forums active on the internet.
Yeah, agree.
Brilliant. And were either of you acquainted with online antinatalism before writing the paper? Like, what was the spark that, told you guys like, hey, more is going on here than just what's being published academically?
We can say that we know antinatalism both as a result of the reflections of authors like Benatar or Cabrera, and as a movement with strength on the internet. So, both.
Brilliant. All right. Well, within the paper, and I've selected a lot of quotes from the paper, and just like I'm so curious to hear you guys' thoughts. So, in part of the paper, and towards the beginning, you say we will explore ways in which various stances on the rejection of procreation generate new historical meanings, as human life, at least, is voluntarily subtracted from formulations of future worlds to inhabit. So I was wondering if you guys could speak a little bit about this passage, particularly in regards to what you mean by new historical meanings.
The idea, which is actually at the heart of our work, is that the rejection of procreation whether it's an idea circulating among intellectuals, social movements, or online activism, represents not only a concrete form of pessimism, but also ends up forcing a new conception of history, a negative history, so to speak, may be emergent, in which non-classical historical ideas such as civilization, progress, and the future are undermined.
Yeah, I think we were then able to compare the idea of possible futures and worlds to inhabit. It's a I can see it's a trend now in historical in theory of history discussions about this new worlds to inhabit. What we are going to do with the future. We need to like populate the future with new ideas because the world is collapsing. So we think that this proliferation of new worlds to inhabit, it's a symptom of the destabilization of this world, a kind of it's like people are trying to avoid think history in a pessimist way and try to populate the future because this world is not stable anymore for different reasons. So we see very optimistic story. Oh, new worlds to build. We need to do this and that. They also bring knowledge or plans about colonizing Mars or geoengineering, or also knowledge from the people from natives from Latin America, and thinking, oh, we need to care nature this way and that way. So both movements are pointing to new worlds to inhabit. And then we brought this idea of pessimistic idea from Ajit Tecker about, okay, history is always a march to the future, but what if a possible future or a future to inhabit is without reproduction, without people, without life, or without sentience? I think the futures of history, the theory of history, must consider this as a possible future as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that you guys have really, for me, helped crystallize an interest that I have been trying to articulate for like a long time now. And I guess it is in this interest in possible futures, because clearly there's this collective mood, this push to like, life is not okay the way that it is now. And so there's all these competing philosophies, competing possible futures. Like, we could have a long-termist future. We could have the possibility of panspermia. We could have the possibility of space travel and bioengineered bliss and biomedical gerontology and ectogenesis and all of these different things that could win, sort of like this argument about, or some sort of combination of all of them that could map out the future. And they're filled with sort of optimism and triumphing over suffering and extinction. And antinatalism is kind of this like this like downer idea, picking its nose in a corner, going like, well, maybe we should just say no to the future. Like, maybe we've proven, or maybe life has proven itself to be like too malignant a thing to play with, and maybe all of these possible futures could cause, on the road to utopia, could cause suffering hitherto unknown. So like, maybe we should back off on this a little bit. I just curious if you wonder if I just was curious if you had any thoughts on that. There's so much about your paper that makes that so clear to me. The place of antinatalism in relation to all of these other possible futures. So just to reiterate, all of these sort of possible futures, and antinatalism is that one possible future that is basically saying, let's not bother. We've already caused enough damage. The things that we do that might sound really positive and wonderful and lovely and utopian on paper may cause far more suffering and harm than even the worst antinatalist future might ever cause. So yeah, any thoughts on that would love to hear.
I don't think that the idea of anticipatory practice is contrary to what you're saying about what antinatalism presupposes uh, in your question that you send us. Sent us. Gabriel, quer you?
Yes, okay. I think it fits around that narrative. I think anticipatory practice foresees life as a blind brute force that goes on indefinitely through reproduction. And both society and nature guide and constrain us towards reproduction. In other words, I think if nothing is done, more beings will be brought into existence, causing great harm. I think antinatalism is this anticipatory practice that seeks to prevent this. But people must know that this can be a possible future because people don't have imagination to understand. I think there's this reflex, negative reflex towards this idea, and I think it's an exercise of imagination and speculation. It's not an option for most of the people. They want to think more about, oh, we should go to Mars or change our ways and culture, but they don't address the suffering of life and then the great harm, what is like to bring new existence.
Yeah, extinction doesn't sound like a lot of fun, especially sentiocentric extinction that might require, concepts of human responsibility to the rest of the sentient creatures on planet Earth. And yeah, I get it completely. Can you explain the meaning behind the term specters of pessimism? I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about specters in terms of hauntology, but I wondered if this was a bit of a different concept or use of the term. Yeah.
Yes, this is just a notion, an academic term. The idea of specters of pessimism comes from Mark Schmidt's work, who argues that there are different types of pessimism. So, Afro-pessimism, queer pessimism, ecological pessimism, or specters, types or specters that permeating the current historical conjuncture and also fostering ideas of uncertain futures.
Yeah, this book was important for us because this book provided this concept that could unify the question of pessimism and antinatalism. The name of the book is Specters of Pessimism, Cultural Logic of the Worst, by Mark Schmidt. It's from 2023, so it's a year ago it was published. So we could read and understand. I think it was a good concept.
Yeah, I'd love to read this book. I had not heard about it, but it sounds absolutely fascinating. I love that you guys lay out sort of the different forms of pessimism and the sort of motivations behind people's pessimism. I mean, I won't get into too many specifics, even though I do in the notes. But I mean, one form of pessimism addresses sort of reality. The other is more of has more of a psychological affect to it. One of the passages that I'd love to hear more about is regarding, pessimism, antinatalism, the meaning of history. You say, to address the theme of pessimism and antinatalism within contemporary discussions on the meaning of history, it is essential to highlight the new ways of apprehending the past in the face of present challenges go beyond academic historical practice. That is, they are not limited to knowledge of the past formalized by academia, but expand to apprehensions of the past to help form new meanings of historical futures from the present, broadening the sense of historical understanding. There's bits and pieces I think that you guys have already explained in this, but if you have any further thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Yes, I think I've mentioned this before, but it's both important for understanding the idea of historical futures and anticipatory practice and how we analyze antinatalism in our work.
Yeah, in our work, we have this proposal of historical futures. I think we think that it incorporates non-academic apprehensions as well, and we included this to reaffirm the academic and non-academic aspects of antinatalism as equally important in our perspective.
Brilliant. I also really love the way that, this paper, in some respects, at least, unless I'm misunderstanding, sort of builds off of things that the wonderful Robert Zandenberger, whose name I know I'm mispronouncing a little bit, but he's an Exploring Antinatalism alum as well, and he's fantastic. And he's also one of the very few so far that has done some inquiry into antinatalism as not only a philosophy but a social movement, some of the online worlds, and what they're producing. So I was curious if you could share with me any of your thoughts on his work and the ways that it sort of influenced your paper.
Yeah, I remember that he's saying that there's a division between this antinatalism that's reactionary and the original antinatalism is more like philosophical. And we were like, we found this affirmation very interesting because our perception was different from like 2 years or 4 years ago. So we think that there's this widening gap in the beginning. I don't think we have knowledge because we didn't know like previously your work and also those things, how the community, how the activism about antinatalism was, but we for sure think that the line is blurring even more. I think your invitation to us is confirms our hypothesis. Yes, because two guys from Brazil writing about history, and then they got interested in pessimism and antinatalism and write this article like very quickly. And then you contact us, and I think this is impressive and confirms our hypothesis about the closing gap now between academic antinatalism and activism.
I would agree with that. Well, just to give you guys some context, so I'm pretty sure that I found the article like the day it came out, because I watch happenings in the antenatal world like a hawk, and then I shared it with Mati Haira, and we both were like very, very excited about it. So yeah, it is fascinating the way that things travel, and those lines are blurring. And I agree with you. It's probably a good example of that. And then you guys happen to follow me. I was gonna sort of like eventually contact you guys, but then you followed me on Instagram, so I thought, well, it's meant to be. Invite him on the show. Let's make this happen. So then you break the article up into 3 sections. I'm going to read the titles of those sections. The World, Not Our Home, which focuses primarily on Patricia McCormack, and I'm so glad that you included an investigation into her work. Her work is of particular interest to me as well. The second section is called It's Better Never to Have Existed, which analyzes Julio Cabrera and David Benatar, and then Anti-natalisms Between Activism and Philosophy, which talks about, this show a little bit and some of my other follies and other people's as well, and it's a fascinating investigation into that. So let's talk about all those 3 sections. Would you mind sort of maybe, in your own words, summarizing the function of all 3 sections?
Yes, the division was made as a matter of organizing ideas, especially due to the involvement of many different authors, because we use and analyze several authors, different authors, and the need to explain the logic of our argument to an audience and familiar with the discussion, because in Brazil this discussion don't start yet.
Yeah, it was very difficult. We tried to present antinatalism in its various ways to historians and researchers unfamiliar with the term. So we wrote this article in a hurry, in a way, but we tried to do our best. There are some things that I will change now, but I think we had a good idea in the way we presented. And we thought that it would be good to start with the question of the Anthropocene. That's why Patricia McCormack is important, because for her, Anthropocene is the way to end the Anthropocene is end the humanity, the humans. So we thought it would be interesting to put Patricia in the first section. But in a way, I believe that Eugene Tecker's critique in the first section is more important for the structure of a work, because he's talking about the world without us and those things. So we didn't want to, the second session with Julio Cabrera and David Benatar will be like very big. If we put McCormick in the second foot, was very pragmatic and a desperate move, trying to organize the article in the like timely.
Well, I think you guys did a fantastic job. It's a very expansive look at the antenatal world. You guys touch on authors that don't, you know what I mean? Like, not a whole lot of people bring up Patricia McCormack's work. And I think it is important because Patricia McCormack's work is an extension of, it's sort of a 2.0 version of an antinatalism that was operational even before David Benatar, not before Cabrera necessarily, but I mean, it's anthropocentric antinatalism reimagined. And then sentiocentric antinatalism sort of came in. And so I think that, like, if it were my article, that's where I would start too, probably. But also bringing Eugene Thatcher in, I mean, that I think was a great move too. I don't know that too many works have sort of brought his perspective in exactly the same way. So I mean, especially under the time constraints that you guys were under, I think you did a brilliant job. You say in this first part, in regards to Patricia McCormack, we will outline how the vision of a world without us, considering antinatalist anxieties, animates a hauntology of the unborn, collapsing the horizon of possible worlds for us to inhabit. So that I'd love to hear some thoughts about that particular quote, but also it's interesting that I don't really see her work that way, in a sense. I mean, and that might just be my fault in coming from more of a sentiocentric perspective, because there's really sort of a celebratory aspect of her antinatalism of life. I mean, because life does go on. We're not there anymore, but like the animals inherit the earth. I mean, it's essentially the vehement vision of antinatalism. So, yeah, that might be the more sentiocentric perspective might be sort of besides the point of the point you're trying to make there. But I'm just curious if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I particularly agree with you. In my personal opinion, I align more with what you call sentiocentric antinatalism. This is an issue I have identified in both McCormack and Cabrera, for example. That is, the concern seems to focus solely on human life, for better or worse.
Yeah, I think, I rewatched your interview with Patricia McCormack, and for me it was clear that Patricia is very optimistic about nature. And I think neither George nor I are about this. We study the history of tropical diseases, so at this point, I think we've been pessimists for a long time.
Yeah, no, I think that really the fact that you guys come from a place of study of diseases, the animal studies. I mean, that's a very, very important element, I think, in the background of writing this. So I'm glad you guys bring that up. I'm sorry that I don't have that many questions about part one. I mean, moving on to part two, again, just another really interesting quote. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit on the figure of the ghost on the horizon, which unhinges the living present, refers to a principle of responsibility towards those who are not yet born. And you cite Derrida. In this movement of foresight, the unborn is a specter that is virtually present, producing anticipatory anxieties that alter the state of things in the now, animating the nuances of contemporary antinatalist aspirations. Before I let you guys speak on that a little bit, I just want to say that this article, and I should have said this earlier, this article was originally written in Portuguese. I did use, like a ChatGPT to translate it, and I may very well be getting some things wrong, so you'll have to inform me of that, should that be the case. But yes, I'd love to hear a little bit about that passage.
I think
Very poetic.
Yeah, I think you got it right. The translation in Portuguese, I don't know. I think it's pretty like similar. The logic is there, and And I think this is poetic and is important, this allegory of the specter. We brought it, actually our title called the attention of Brazilian scholars. What's going on? Those guys were writing about dengue mosquito and now they come with this idea of specter, antinatalism. What's going on? It was very surprising. We are waiting for the answers of criticism and those things. But I think this part, the second part discusses the ontological misalignment with the feeling that the world is not a home, the proliferation of possible worlds, especially the version that considers the flow of life. It's a symptom of this misalignment, I guess. I think the reiteration of life must flow, we need to go on. Things are not good, but we have hope that things will go on. It's a symptom of this pessimism that's going on right now. And I think this quote you read, this Derrida quote you read, it's very important because the figure of the ghost on the horizon, which unhinges the living present, refers to a principle, now end of quote. We think that refers to a principle of responsibility towards those who are not yet born. I think this is our point, using hauntology as this figure of the specter in the future and horizon.
I mean, one of the most exciting things about this paper is that you guys have actually read a ton of Cabrera, and like most have not. I have not because of the language barrier. So it's kind of rare to see people like bringing specifics. Like there's quotes from Cabrera in this paper that I had never seen before, never seen translated into English, particularly because you guys refer to some of the far earlier works. Those in particular almost never get the kind of like attention that they should. So that was really exciting to me.
In fact,
Go ahead.
I'm very happy with your comment. Julio Cabrera was an important gateway at last for me to better understanding many of the antinatalism arguments and discovering these ideas in his book, in his 1989 book, was quite fascinating. Of course, in this context of his book on negative ethics, he doesn't use the term antinatalism, but he does systematize several key arguments for the discussion. And so it's very interesting.
Yeah, Julio was so far ahead of the pack. I mean, he did so much to jumpstart antinatalism before there was a contemporary use of the word for it. And it's been this crazy process, I think, for everybody of backtracking and finding those older works, and but I think especially some of these quotes that you guys found in regards to animals, because of course, like Julio's antinatalism is like probably maybe the most purely anthropocentric antinatalism out there. So I mean, just to read one of those quotes, the choice to address only the issue of the value of human life. It is human life that is being discussed here, not life in general of animals, plants, or stars. Nothing will be said here about the value of life of giraffes. I mean, that's just like a great, great quote that I had absolutely never heard before. So congratulations on that. Honestly, it's just very exciting. You guys make a rather stunning claim regarding the work of Julio Cabrera, which I sort of understand now that you guys showed me that book on maternity.
Manifesto Antimaternalista.
Yes, exactly. I sort of further get that now, but I had never heard anybody make the critique of Cabrera before this, that there's this like that there's sort of this blame of women in his works, that especially in the book that he wrote with the late what's his name? Sorry. This the co-author of
Is this
oh, you actually have a print copy of it.
Tiago Lenharo dos Santos.
Yeah, who unfortunately died.
In Portuguese, it's Porque te amo não nascerás.
Amazing. Yeah, there is an English translation of it, but I actually have not yet read it. I really, it's one of the books I most want to read by Cabrera. But so you point out a quote from him on this. Curious that women, so generally illogical, become highly logical on this point and frown with displeasure when I say I like children, but I don't like parents. It's just an interesting point. Do you guys feel like Cabrera kind of like dips into misogyny? That would surprise me. I don't want to, but yeah, I just it just had never heard anybody bring that up in regards to Cabrera before.
Uh, yes, our critique of Cabrera is primarily based on the content of his book, Porque Te Amo Não Nascerás. Although it is a great and accessible book on negative philosophy and, above all, the dissemination of antinatalism ideas, we find in it a maternalist perspective where the difficulty of addressing or talking about the problem of procreation is attributed to mothers or the illogical behavior of women. Based on this, one could say that there is indeed misogynistic content in Cabrera's work. Perhaps the fact that in his negative ethics he is against abortion further reinforces this idea, along with maternalism in general. No, indeed, Cabrera does not seem to have commented on feminism in his work, which makes it's difficult to say exactly that his radical bioethics could not be feminist. Evidently, there are openings for this as well.
Yeah, one thing I think we must say is that we find Cabrera brilliant. We are reading this Mal-Estar e Moralidade, was translated into English as Discomfort and Moral Impediment. This is it's a great book, and I think in this work Cabrera tried to make something more light, and I think to make this more accessible. And then he put this joke, and I think it wasn't a good joke, but I don't think he's misogynistic in like strong like one. But you know, we sometimes in our culture in South America we have those small jokes, and he tried to do this, but today I think he wouldn't write like this. I don't think so. The readers changed already from the time he like wrote this book. From now they changed, they're more critical, and I think it will be different.
No, fascinating insights, and this just to make it clear that my question in no way is a witch hunt against Cabrera. I adore Julio, and I have a huge respect for his work, and of course he's been on this show, and I think his contribution is just like absolutely second to none. And I don't think that his stance on abortion, even though I disagree with it, I mean he's made it pretty clear that like he wouldn't take the rights away from women or anything like that. But it is really interesting to hear sort of confirmation, because I've always sort of wondered is that he hasn't really written about feminism or like I mean it's not really gone in that direction. But also I think you're both very correct in pointing out the importance of because I love you you shall not be born. That really maybe was the first kind of blurring of this world between academic I mean Thiago was one of his students, so we couldn't say he was completely devoid of academic interest or stature, but it was still it wasn't an academic book, it was a novel, it was something sort of different. And I think that may very well have been the first piece of that blurring that you guys speak about later. I just want a quick side note. It was great that you guys brought up Julio's debate with Karima Kerma. That was meant to originally be its own book, and it just didn't end up happening, but the text still exists, but very few people even know that it exists. So well done on just even knowing about the existence of that. Well, then just also briefly, you quote Morioka as saying that the academic study of antinatalist ideas and their history has only begun recently. I think he's absolutely right about that. I'm glad you guys featured that little quote. So I hope you guys will forgive me. I do have to disagree with you a little bit on the way that you guys sort of make the distinctions between some of these antinatalisms. So you say that so as far as anthropocentric antinatalism, I would agree with you certainly that Julio Cabrera is an anthropocentric antinatalist, but David Benatar is not. David Benatar is a sentiocentric antinatalist, and it was really I think one of the biggest contributions that David Benatar made was that it was no longer it was a real paradigm shift that his academic antinatalism was sentiocentric. Patricia McCormack is sometimes considered anthropocentric, but as Mati Haira and I sort of also comment on in the book, she could be considered biocentric, because there is this sort of, even though it's a little misanthropic to humans, very misanthropic to humans, there is sort of this love of life, this continuation of nature. So but there's also some sentiocentrism in there, right? Like that we have to acknowledge, because there is huge motivations towards animal rights and the concern for animals. And then true sentiocentric antinatalism would be Benatarianism, certainly, but also non-academic forms of antinatalism like ethylism. So, and then as Mati and I also point out in our book, there's also something called reverse biocentrism. And I think that that's possibly what ethylism is close to, because there's not only, and I think maybe sort of the course that some inklings of contemporary antinatalism are reaching for, because it's not just a concern for sentience necessarily, but also all life, maybe coming from more of a Kantian place of like all life has needs attached to it. It's the creation of it or the perpetuation of it is attached to manipulation. And interestingly enough, Cabrera sort of makes some of these, even coming from his place of anthropocentrism, his ideas about manipulation, I think, is hugely important to what is becoming reverse biocentric antinatalism. And I'll be talking a lot more about that in future works very soon. So I apologize for just sort of a recontextualization of your classifications. I don't know if you guys have any comments about that, but
no problem. Yeah, we are glad that you did this, because we don't have many good readers to read our paper, and actually we are extremely grateful for your careful reading. And I think you're right. We agree with this organization. I think we read Mati Hari's article too quickly and misinterpret it. Actually, I think that, of course, we think that Benatar is sentiocentric, and I also don't believe McCormack is sentiocentric extinctionist. In the sense, McCormack is read by Max Schmidt, the specter of pessimism, as a hopeful utopian, even if in a misanthropic way. And I think Patricia puts the human in a very exceptional place, but not the human exceptionalism, like we are more evolved or we are a special creature, but in a negative way. Humans are intrinsically bad for life in general. I think Patricia is very misanthropic in this way. And I think this is very interesting.
Yes, sorry. I need to study more about all these classifications, right? But in this case, would Benatarianism be the more philosophical expression of sentiocentric antinatalism,
yes.
and ethylism is more militant expression, right?
You hit the nail right in the head. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could say, so in chapter 6 of Better Never to Have Been, he lays out the concept of phased extinction, and that would come in sort of maybe two flavors, right? There's dying extinction, in which we can, some procreation remains, and then, we die out gradually, or then there's killing extinction. And there can be a combination of the two. So you could sort of see ethylism as kind of this non-academic expression of the two, that it's sort of, because you have because it's sentiocentric, so you couldn't possibly cause, human beings could have the possibility of agreeing on going extinct. Whether whether that would actually happen or not is a whole other subject, but it could happen. It could be that we could talk ourselves into it, but we could never talk a lion into going extinct. It would have to require some form of human interventionalism, and it's very possible that we couldn't achieve sentient extinction through sterilization alone. You probably couldn't extinct all life or all sentient life on its own, so it probably would require the killing of some of those animals. Moving on to the third section, antinatalisms between activism and philosophy. There's this great quote, the relationship between activism and resignation in the practice of antinatalism seems to reveal a unique facet of what Schmidt describes as ambivalent nature of pessimism. So this was another really fascinating aspect of the paper, sort of the place of pessimism within antinatalism, and how some antinatalism, and I think you quote my interview with David Benatar, that sort of the place of pessimism is a bit there's sort of a tension there, right? Because when it comes to activism and antinatalism, are we doing something wrong, essentially, by being activists in a pessimistic philosophy, essentially? And I think this is a point of disagreement that I often get into with a lot of antinatalists, and even to do sort of with do we need to acknowledge the place of pessimism within antinatalism? Because even like I had a panel discussion a couple of months ago with different antinatalist philosophers discussing the definition of antinatalism, and a question came up about sort of the place of pessimism and antinatalism, and even some of them, referred to, the influence of Schopenhauer as sort of like, well, there's an embryo of a connection there between antinatalism and pessimism, but are we really bound by such a thing? So there's all kinds of, and I don't know that there's any sort of answer there, but what I will say, and I'm sorry to ramble on, but I will say that in my opinion, the conclusions of antinatalism are so profound that it's no wonder that people would not feel compelled to be bound by some sort of adherence to pessimism, that it's sort of it's philosophy, it's activism in motion, that it sort of requires, it gets you out of your seat and it makes you want to do something. And so that's an inevitability of antinatalism. The activism is an inevitability of how strong, just how powerful the conclusions are. So anyway, just any thoughts you guys might have about the relationship between antinatalism and pessimism. I mean, it's so brilliantly laid out in the paper itself, but love to hear that. Yeah, whatever you guys have in mind.
Go ahead, Josh.
Okay. Interesting. This relationship between antinatalists and ethalists, it's very interesting. Indeed, for me, antinatalism is something entirely connected to pessimism. But in this sense, I have a question. Would ethalists be optimists? And if they be optimists, but they optimist about what exactly?
Well, I mean, and Mendham, who was the creator of ethalism, the one who kind of started this whole mess, I mean, he even likens it to wishing on a star. You know what I mean? Like, there is a kind of optimism to it. I don't think that necessarily there's a difference between antinatalists and ethalists there. I think that there are antinatalists who have just as much optimism. I mean, some, there's organizations like Stop Having Kids. They're not ethalists, but they're on the streets, constantly here in America, talking to people about not having kids, talking to people about not having about antinatalism. So there's a certain amount of optimism involved in, I think, all forms of antinatalist activism. I mean, certainly even vehement, something that's there's tons of optimism in there. I think that there's some form of optimism. We can certainly prevent some amount of people from starting new lives. I mean, I don't think that there's any reason to be pessimistic about that. Can we cause people to prevent new lives to the point of extinction? Well, maybe that's pushing optimism too far, but I think it goes back to kind of the types of pessimism that you guys were talking about earlier in the paper, right? Like there needs pessimism as informed by reality. Like there's some limit to what that reality will yield as in terms of like the what can be gained from antinatalist activism. But I don't know that we've necessarily completely mapped what could be achieved through that activism yet. Like, do we have reason? Like, what is the ceiling of that realistic optimism to antinatalist pessimism? Right? Like, there's got to be something that we could achieve. Like, can we be pessimist? Do we have to be complete pessimists about organizing around the idea? I'm not sure, because almost all of the attempts to organize around the idea, like actually build proto NGOs, all of those have failed. So maybe there is reason to be completely pessimistic, but maybe there isn't. So it's a bit uncharted territory, how you build a social movement that is rational around an idea that is so against the grain of pessimism and people's optimism, I suppose.
Yes.
And I think that that's maybe a problem that ethalists have had a little bit more I haven't really given a shit about as much as a lot of antinatalists, but you definitely see it from both camps.
Right.
Another quote: given the complexity of these intersections between online activism and professional philosophy within the current pessimistic conjecture, it is undeniable that the formation of contemporary antinatalist ideology is singular and could not have arisen at any other point in space and time. That's a quote from Zendenberg. I would agree with that, maybe. And one of the things I'm most curious about is where do you think all of this is going? So what optimism or what ceiling of pessimism do each of you see in regards to this?
I think there are many ways to do activism in antinatalism. I was wondering if we are not doing it right now, because in a way we are like writing about it and saying that it exists. There's a possibility, and this can be good. This can be better. We can do better about this. And I think I said this before previously, that I believe that your invitation is part of prove this point. And I don't see in Brazil people going on the street with talking to people like Lawrence, Anton, like do, and people around real activism on the streets like you do, like Lawrence, Anton. So I think in Brazil maybe take time, but I don't have talent for activism. Maybe it's lack of practice. Maybe I was wondering if I could do this or not. I think we didn't think we could write this article previously, but we just did. And I think it's open. It's more about people engaging, building a community, and then like we can expect for the best. and build this, how can I say, this way of thinking, this thought style oriented to activism. I don't have this, but we are just curious and we write about it. We like to think about it. And I think there are different personalities in antinatalism community. So I think we see what fits. We're just arriving here, so we don't know what's going to happen.
That's fascinating. I mean, I'd love to see more organized activism coming from Brazil, South America. I hope to see those kinds of that kind of progress being made. In your final conclusion sections, the rigid division between activist and philosophical expressions of antinatalism have been increasingly blurred over the past 4 years, and we've talked a lot about that already. I mean, I just want to reiterate again, I'm really excited to see you two like pick up on that. And I wonder if like what you guys think have been the biggest catalysts to that. I mean, if I may be so bold as to say, and you do write about it in the paper, the show kind of has done some of that. There's also other efforts, like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Antinatalism magazine. That was maybe one of the first, aside from, Cabrera's work, that, were actual like people that were maybe sort of somewhere in the activist field started contacting the philosophers. But also I think like, when Mati showed up, it was a huge, a movement towards that direction too, not only because he collaborates with an activist like me, but also because he's visible. Like, I mean, Cabrera is sort of like been obviously a consummate, incredible academic philosopher, but sort of somewhat hidden, unfortunately, because of the language barrier. So it wasn't really like a part of the community that was sort of forming online. And then you got David Benatar, who's like kind of a specter in his own right, because you can't see his face. But then there's also Karima Kerma, an incredible philosopher, but not doesn't have like that academic, wasn't a professor, so there's a little bit of a difference. But the idea that like an academic philosopher is like a real person and like can have a Reddit account and can not only collaborate with antinatalist activists, have a partnership with an antinatalist activist in terms of like the creation of material, but also is just like a visible human being, and like a really cool guy who writes rock operas and stuff. Like, I actually really think that was a huge game changer, not only in the blurring, but also in like the sense of like antinatalism had like no sense of leadership, and I think there's a little bit of that now going on with his presence. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but I agree with you that the lines have blurred, and I'm very happy to see them go in that direction.
Yes, I think this relationship is really interesting. And as I said earlier, in the case of history, this is something that has been much discussed, namely the relationship between academic knowledge and knowledge outside the academy. In the case of philosophy, despite being a very popular and in some cases even commercial area of knowledge, this relationship seems more difficult in practice. So with antinatalism, this has changed, in my opinion.
Yeah, we are. I think we are happy to arrive at the discussions on antinatalism with this renewed landscape. Actually, I got in touch with Mari online, and he was kind enough to send me one of his articles, and was great.
Sweet. I'm glad that I'm very happy to know that. Yeah, thank you guys for your thoughts on that. Going back to this discussion about pessimism and antinatalism, another quote: even if antinatalism may be considered a lost cause in advance, consistent with a pessimism that embraces it. The movements directed by its ideology already outline a historical future where the refusal of continuity is not merely a form of resistance, but also an ethical stance towards future generations, a movement that produces an inevitable hauntology. In the retreat of a horizon filled with worlds of us, the specters that empty these future worlds are already returning, a march of the unborn specters. So I think I messed a couple of words up in there, but there's a beautiful poetry to the way you guys can make this conclusion. Do you think that antinatalism will lose something important if it becomes more activist than necessarily adheres to the bounds of pessimism? Like if antinatalism somehow transcends or whatever, just moves in a different direction than sort of what pessimism would allow or likes or finds acceptable, is it something else? Is it lost something important? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't particularly think it will lose, but at the same time, I find it hard to imagine a scenario in which there is a growth in antinatalist movements and organizations. And not that I think that would be a bad thing, on the contrary, but I don't believe in human beings that much. I think that even with all the cards on the table, they will always look for some subterfuge. So I'm
Yeah.
very pessimistic.
We try to organize this idea of pessimism and antinatalism because I think there's pessimism can provide some strength and prove antinatalism is right because procreate is bad. This is a pessimistic way to think about life or reproduction and those things. And I think we must always ask what we are talking about, pessimistic about what. For example, talking with friends, he was reading Cioran. He said, "Oh, Cioran made me much better because now I have this outlook on life." And he has this kind of acid humor, but he's a pessimistic. So it's very nuanced. I think it's all about the way you connect with certain things in a poetical level or more than the level of the thinking of the reasoning. And I think perhaps when people become more pessimistic about the continuity of life, antinatalism will grow because there's this, as you said, there's this force. The claim is very strong, and we start to view things differently. And I believe that the richness of antinatalism as a movement is its ability to think about activism in different ways. For example, I think I was talking with Jorge before this interview that the March of Unborn Specters could be an excellent black metal band, maybe. So I think there's ways to talk about this.
100%. Please make that happen. No, brilliant thoughts, you guys. Thank you so much. So listen, confession time. The last couple of questions in the document I sent you were written by ChatGPT. So let's skip them because I think we've covered generally what they have. But yeah, I listened, and once again, not to repeat myself ad infinitum, but I really do think this is an incredibly important paper. I think it touches on things that just really no other or very few other academics have so far. So I think there's a good amount of pioneering that's taken place here. The link to the article will be below. I highly encourage everybody to go check it out. Is there any plans for an English translation of the paper?
I think it will be great to do this translation. Probably we must rewrite the article because most of the journals, they don't publish translations, but we can tweak and we can improve. I think our conversation here was very important to improve our arguments and think more about things we stated and organize better the paper and maybe put some more like quotations about Cabrera and Actually, we are going to quote this episode in the future for sure, because it's already happening and it's important to put some of our reasoning and reflections about antinatalism. But sure, yeah, I believe this was just the first of many articles. I think this is my favorite subject at the moment. I think I can't stop now.
It's addictive, isn't it? There's no subject in the world like antinatalism. It's a like I've likened it to, in a world where like everything has been done to death, or that's what people think. Antinatalism is still this just like uncracked oyster, and so I'm glad that you've gotten the bug. Georgie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, our idea is to continue research not only antinatalism as a part of pessimism, but issues of human reproduction in general, demographics, and climate anxieties. So we are very exciting to continue this agenda of research.
Brilliant. So I can't wait to see your future works on antinatalism then. Very exciting. Where can people find you guys on the internet? Where's the best place to check out the article? And how can our audience best support what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I have an Instagram with published papers and discussions and online meetings, academic stuff. But basically on Instagram and ResearchGate, if you're like a scholar or if you're writing articles, it's a good way to connect. And also, I think we'll need the help of the antinatalist community to read our articles beforehand, because we need to publish in English. I think will be great. And soon we plan to be publishing our ideas in English, so we can connect, and maybe the community, I'm speaking to all of you who are listening, can give us some feedback.
Yes, in addition to ResearchGate and Instagram, anyone with an interest in cinema can check out the films, the movies I've directed on my YouTube channel. There is no a channel actually, but it's my account in YouTube. And follow me on Letterboxd. I have an artistic work, cinema and heavy metal, that I wasn't able to explore in this interview, but which in a way is related to the themes discussed here. So
Well, we'll have to, especially if any of your music or films have some antinatalism in it, we'll have to have you back on the show at some point, just to talk about those projects. So yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't cover it there, but there will be a wide selection, I hope, of links below. So everybody is very, very highly encouraged to go check it out. Just really, thank you both of you so much for this wonderful opportunity to get to speak to you about your work. I really love the work you both are doing. And I, for one, if I can help in any, as a member of the community, if I can help in any way, doing that sort of, looking at future projects ahead of time and stuff. I know that there definitely will be other people all too happy and pleased to be able to lend their hand in that kind of way. So congratulations on the publication of this paper. Looking forward to all your future works. Thank you both so much for being my guests today on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for your careful reading of our article, and thanks for your generosity, Amanda. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you both, guys. Hey everybody, it's Amanda. Are you looking for an excellent way of making academic antinatalist works more available across the globe? I know I am. And so I'm delighted to announce that the wonderful and award-winning Polish publishing house,
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego,
which over the last 2 years has produced some exceptionally beautiful Polish editions of both original works like
Antinatalism
by
Mikołaj Starzyński,
as well as classic academic antinatalist works like David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been, has now opened an online shop featuring the magnificent antinatalist Ouroboros designed by
Michał Dziadkowiec.
The logo is fully customizable and available on a wide variety of products. Proceeds from all sales at the shop go directly towards the translation, production, and publication of more Polish editions by
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
What a perfect way for the antinatalist community to help assist an amazing company doing such important work, making more antinatalist academic works more widely available. Link below!
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
The most dangerous idea in the world. That she will not have children. That he is not allowed to spread his sperm into outer space. Is not a bioethicist who questions the value of human life itself like a physicist who denies the existence of cause and effect, or a theologian who denies the existence of God?
In his recent essay, Bioethics and the Value of Human Life, philosopher and bioethicist Matti Haira answers this question. Absolutely, definitely, maybe. He also distinguishes between bioethics with and without a hyphen, bio-utilitarian Thanatos ethics, and a newcomer among ethical theories of value, oib ethics. You heard that right. Bioethics spelled backwards. Bioethics and the Value of Human Life by Matti Haira on the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics. Out now, totally free, open access. Go check it out. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Exploring Antinatalism can also be heard on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon.com, and so many other platforms. You can email me at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. Website designed by Visions Noirs. Please follow him at www.bionoir.com and follow him on Instagram. Logo art by Life Sucks. Please subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his shop on Etsy at www.etsy.com/shop/LifeSucksPublishing. Music by Matti Haira. You can hear the whole song, Life is a Sexually Transmitted Disease with a Mortality Rate of 100%, by following the link in the description, and make sure to also read his academic paper which inspired the song. If you must give them a gift, then give them the gift of non-existence, in the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics on cambridge.org. Links below. All the best, and bye for now.
Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.